Hi, very glad to see you on the channel. Before you start listening to the story, write in the comments whether you like the voice on the video. I used to believe marriage was built on love, respect, and partnership. But over the years, I had come to realize mine was built on endurance. I had become the joke, not just at home, but everywhere we went. Melissa had a way of making me feel insignificant, of turning my sacrifices into punchlines. It started small, a condescending remark here, a dismissive laugh there. But over time, it evolved into something cruel. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that she didn't mean to make me feel this way, that I was overreacting, but I wasn't. And tonight, at her father's birthday dinner, she made that painfully clear. The restaurant was buzzing with conversation, filled with her family, the people she always tried to impress. Melissa was in her element, tossing out stories, making people laugh, ensuring every eye was on her. And then, just like always, she turned it on me. "You know, Dad," she said, swirling her wine, "I have to give Jay credit. He's really mastered the art of doing absolutely nothing all day." Laughter rippled across the table. My jaw tightened. "He calls himself a stay-at-home dad," she continued, smirking. "But let's be real. How hard is it to throw some chicken nuggets in the oven?" More laughter. I forced a tight smile, gripping my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. "He likes to tell people he supports me so I can focus on my work, but honestly, I think he just likes an excuse to avoid getting a real job." A real job. Melissa's mother chuckled awkwardly. Her brother shifted in his chair. Even her father, who had never been my biggest fan, glanced at me with something resembling pity. The air grew heavier, the laughter fading. They were starting to realize something. This wasn't a joke. This was humiliation. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced my voice to stay calm. "You know, Melissa, it's funny. I used to think we were partners, that I took care of the home so you could focus on your career, that we were a team." I set my napkin down, but clearly I was mistaken. She blinked. A flicker of something flashed across her face. Annoyance? Surprise? For once, she didn't have a response. I exhaled slowly, pushing back from the table. If I'm such a joke, I don't think I belong at this table. And with that, I stood up. The restaurant felt too bright, too loud. I could feel the eyes on me as I walked away. But I didn't stop. I didn't let myself look back, because I already knew what I'd see. Melissa, sitting there, stunned, realizing for the first time that maybe, just maybe, she had finally pushed me too far. And she had no idea what was coming next. I didn't go home right away after leaving the restaurant. Instead, I drove, letting the road stretch out before me, my thoughts racing faster than the car. I had never walked out on Melissa like that. Not in public, not in front of her family. I could still see the stunned look on her face, the way her lips had parted in disbelief. Good. For years, I had been the punchline in my own marriage. The dependable, quiet husband who stayed home, handled the house, raised the kids, only to be mocked for it. Melissa had built a life of appearances, thriving on the admiration of others. But admiration wasn't enough. She needed a target, someone to belittle, to step on, to make herself look better. And I had let her. Until tonight. I pulled into her driveway a little after 10. The house was dark except for the glow of the porch light. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, neat, quiet, still. Too still. I walked in, locking the door behind me. No sign of Melissa. I didn't have to wait long. Half an hour later, headlights swept across the window. Moments later, the front door slammed. Melissa stormed into the living room, heels clicking against the hardwood. Her face was flushed, her carefully crafted mask cracking at the edges. "What the hell was that?" she demanded. I didn't bother standing up. I remained seated in the armchair, watching her, calm. She threw her purse onto the couch. Walking out like that, in front of my family. She let out a short laugh, sharp and bitter. "Do you have any idea how that made me look?" I exhaled slowly. "You mean how you made me look?" She scoffed. "Oh, don't be dramatic." "Dramatic?" I repeated, tilting my head. "Melissa, you stood there and told a room full of people that I was a joke. That raising our kids and running this house isn't a real job." She crossed her arms. "It was a joke, Jake. Don't be so sensitive." There it was. The same dismissive, patronizing tone she always used whenever I tried to call her out. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. You know, for years, I let you do this. I let you make me feel like I wasn't enough, like I wasn't doing enough. But I'm done. I met her gaze, unflinching. You humiliated me in front of your family tonight. And the worst part? I don't even think you realize how cruel you are. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You're overreacting. I let out a quiet laugh. You always say that. Every time I try to stand up for myself, you twist it around. Make me the problem. But this isn't about me being too sensitive or overreacting. This is about you not respecting me. And I'm finally seeing it for what is. Her expression shifted slightly, just for a second. Something flickered behind her eyes. Fear. She opened her mouth, then closed it, exhaling sharply. So what? You're just gonna pout now? Give me the silent treatment. I stood, my presence towering over her for the first time in a long time. No, I'm just not going to let you walk all over me anymore. She faltered, her usual confidence cracking. Jake, you're taking this way too personally. I shook my head. No, I'm finally taking it seriously. For the first time since I had known her, Melissa didn't have a response. And that's when it hit me. She had never expected me to fight back. To her, I had always been safe. Someone she could push, ridicule, and manipulate without consequences. But that was over. I turned toward the hallway. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight. Melissa blinked. Are you kidding me? I didn't answer. I just walked away. For once, I was the one leaving her behind. And she had no idea that this was only the beginning. The morning after our argument, Melissa acted like nothing had happened. She moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, pouring coffee, scrolling through her phone, tossing a half-hearted morning in my direction. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat at the table, watching her, studying her. Melissa was always good at resetting, brushing conflict under the rug, pretending things were fine, counting on me to move past it without forcing a real discussion. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. She glanced up, catching my stare. What? I shook my head. Nothing. She rolled her eyes. If you're still sulking about last night, you need to let it go. I let out a quiet chuckle. Yeah, you'd like that, wouldn't you? She hesitated, just for a second, before turning her attention back to her phone. And in that moment, something clicked. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't scrambling for an excuse, or over-explaining, or making empty promises to change. Because she didn't care. Because this wasn't about me at all. For years, I had blamed myself for the way she treated me. I thought if I worked harder, proved my worth, she'd respect me. But the truth was, she had checked out of our marriage a long time ago. I just hadn't seen it. Not yet. Later that afternoon, while Melissa was at work, I found myself pacing the house. My mind wouldn't shut off. The way she spoke to me, the way she belittled me. It wasn't just cruelty. It was resentment. And resentment usually had a reason. I moved through the bedroom, straightening up the space out of habit. But as I reached Melissa's dresser, I noticed something. Her jewelry box. It was slightly ajar, the lid not fully closed. Melissa wasn't careless. She was meticulous. And yet, something had been left just out of place. I hesitated. This was wrong. I shouldn't be snooping. But my gut wouldn't let it go. I lifted the lid. Inside, tucked beneath her bracelets and earrings, was a small, navy blue box. My heart pounded as I pulled it out. I already knew this wasn't for me. Slowly, I opened it. Inside sat a men's watch. Expensive. Sleek. The kind of gift that wasn't picked up on a whim. The receipt was still inside. Purchased 2 weeks ago. Paid in cash. The breath left my lungs. My fingers tightened around the box. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Melissa wasn't just cruel. She wasn't just dismissive. She was cheating. I sank onto the bed, staring at the watch, my thoughts spiraling. The late nights, the work trips, the constant need to impress her social circle. It had all been leading to this. I wasn't a joke to her because she thought I was weak. I was a joke because she had already replaced me. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then, something inside me snapped. I would not be the fool anymore. I would not be the man who looked the other way, who let her walk all over me while she played house with someone else. No, I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. Melissa had spent years making me feel small. Now, it was time for her to feel what it was like to lose. I put the box back exactly where I found it, my hand steady despite the storm inside me. But before I closed it completely, I made a small change. I removed the watch. Then I took an old, broken one from my drawer and placed it inside instead. She wouldn't notice, not until she handed it over. And when that moment came, when she realized she had been caught before she even knew it, I wanted to be there to see it. I shut the jewelry box, straightened my shirt, and exhaled. The game had just begun. I spent the next few days watching Melissa the way a hunter watches its prey, noticing everything. The way she checked her phone more often, the way she smiled at messages she never shared, the way she disappeared for longer stretches, always with a perfect excuse. If I had discovered the truth a year ago, I might have confronted her immediately. I would have demanded answers, let her twist my anger into something irrational, let her win. But I wasn't that man anymore. Melissa had spent years treating me like a fool. Now, she was going to learn what happened when I stopped playing along. The first step was information. I needed to know who. I needed to know how long. I needed to know everything. I started small, checking our phone records when she was asleep. Melissa was careful, deleting messages, making sure there was no obvious evidence. But she couldn't erase call logs. And there it was, a number she had called over and over for the past few months. Morning, afternoon, late at night. I copied it down and ran a quick search. No name. A private number. Interesting. I clenched my jaw, my mind running through the possibilities. Someone with something to lose. Someone who didn't want to leave a trail. I needed more. So, I took things a step further. While Melissa was in the shower, I retrieved an extra key fob for her car and synced it to my phone. It was something I had done years ago when we first got the vehicle, an app that let me track the car's location remotely. At the time, it was meant for safety. Now, it was for something else entirely. It didn't take long for my patience to pay off. That Friday, Melissa left the house at 7 p.m., claiming she was meeting her charity team to discuss an upcoming gala. I smiled. Sounds great. Have fun. She hesitated just for a second. Maybe she thought I would question her. But when I didn't, she relaxed, kissed my cheek like nothing was wrong, and walked out the door. I watched her taillights fade down the street. Then I pulled out my phone. Tracking. Her car headed downtown. Not to any restaurant or office, but to a private luxury high-rise. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Now I knew where she was going. Now, I just needed to know who was waiting for her. I parked a block away from the building, keeping my distance. The entrance was sleek, modern, expensive. A place where politicians, executives, and celebrities conducted business away from prying eyes. I watched as Melissa stepped out of her car, adjusting her dress, checking her reflection in the glass door before stepping inside. Less than 5 minutes later, he arrived. A black luxury sedan pulled up, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out, his posture stiff, deliberate. I knew that face. A politician, a high-profile one. I had seen him in the news. The clean-cut public figure, the family man who prided himself on helping struggling communities. The same man whose campaign Melissa's charity had been working with for the past year. That's who she was sneaking off to see. I gripped the steering wheel, every muscle in my body tense. Melissa wasn't just cheating on me. She was doing it with someone who had just as much to lose. And now, I had all the leverage I needed. I didn't follow them inside. I didn't need to. I had everything I needed to destroy her. But this wasn't just about revenge. This was about making sure she felt what I had felt. So I spent the next 2 days putting my plan together. The annual charity gala was coming up, Melissa's biggest event of the year. The place where she shined, where she paraded around in front of donors and reporters, painting herself as the perfect wife, the perfect philanthropist. She thought she was untouchable there. She had no idea I was about to burn it all down. 2 days before the gala, I made a special donation in the politician's name. $100,000. Melissa's charity account lit up with the transaction. The confirmation email sent straight to her inbox. A donation that he never actually made. I could already picture the chaos. Melissa gushing over the money. Reporters latching onto the story. The politician being blindsided when his name was publicly attached to the cause. And at the height of it all, I would be standing right there, watching it unfold, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal everything. Melissa had spent years making me feel small. Now, I was about to make sure she never felt powerful again. The night of the gala arrived, and I played my role to perfection. I put on my best suit, straightened my tie, and stepped into a world that had never truly belonged to me. This was Melissa's world. The glittering lights, the champagne-fueled small talk, the carefully curated image of wealth and generosity. She thrived in these settings, basking in the admiration of socialites and politicians, the people she desperately wanted to impress. But tonight wasn't about her success. Tonight was about her downfall. I walked through the grand entrance of the event hall, nodding to familiar faces. Everyone knew me as Melissa's husband, the quiet, devoted man who stood at her side while she networked, smiled, and made her deals. They didn't know that underneath my calm demeanor, I was holding the detonator. Melissa spotted me almost immediately. She beamed, striding toward me in a deep emerald gown, her makeup flawless, her confidence unwavering. "Jake," she greeted, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "You look amazing." I smiled. "So do you." She was completely unaware. "Try to enjoy yourself tonight." "Okay," she said, already scanning the room for more important people. "Mingle. Have a drink. But don't wander off when I make my speech. I want you beside me for photos." I chuckled. "Oh, don't worry. I wouldn't miss this for the world." She nodded approvingly before floating away, already slipping into conversations with donors, city officials, and reporters. I watched her work the room, charming everyone in sight. It was almost a shame I was about to ruin her. The gala was in full swing when I saw him arrive, the politician. He entered through the side doors, shaking hands, flashing his perfect, media-trained smile. The man who had been sneaking around with my wife now stood in front of cameras, pretending to be a model of morality. I fought the urge to laugh. Melissa noticed him, too. I saw the flicker of nerves in her eyes before she regained control, giving him the same polished, practiced grin she gave everyone else. She moved toward him carefully, keeping her distance, yet making sure they were seen together. She thought she was untouchable. I checked my watch. It was time. I walked up to the stage, nodding to the event coordinator. "I'd like to say a few words before Melissa's speech," I said smoothly. She smiled. "Of course." The microphone was mine. The audience quieted as I took the podium, smiling at the sea of high-profile guests. I caught Melissa's eye from across the room. She smiled back, completely unaware. I tapped the mic lightly. "Good evening, everyone. I'd just like to take a moment to recognize the generosity that makes this organization possible. Tonight, we celebrate the incredible work of this charity, and we couldn't do it without our amazing donors." The crowd murmured in agreement. I smiled. "And of course, we must acknowledge our biggest donor of the night, someone who has gone above and beyond to support this cause." I turned toward the politician, locking eyes with him. His smile faltered. Melissa's did, too. Everyone followed my gaze. The room grew silent. "That's right," I continued. "A very special thank you to our guest tonight for his generous $100,000 donation. Truly, there's no one more committed to supporting this charity than him." The cameras turned to the politician. Reporters leaned forward, their pens scratching against their notepads. Murmurs filled the room. The politician's face drained of color. He shook his head slightly, looking around as if searching for someone to fix this. Melissa took a sharp step forward, her panic barely concealed. "Jake," she said, forcing a laugh. "What are you doing?" I ignored her. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a stack of printed emails. "But let's not forget the most personal contribution of all," I said, my voice calm, controlled. "Because this man hasn't just been funding the charity, he's been personally involved in ways no check ever could." The room froze. I let the words sink in. Melissa's breathing became uneven. The politician's jaw clenched. I walked down the steps, weaving through the tables, handing out copies of the emails. The explicit messages, the photos, the undeniable proof. Reporters snatched them up like gold. Gasps filled the air. Melissa's face crumbled. "Jake, stop." I smiled at her, folding my hands in my pockets. "What?" The politician turned and walked out, his face twisted in pure humiliation. Melissa rushed after him, desperation in every step. Wait, we can fix this. The cameras followed them. The guests stared, stunned, whispers turning into full-blown conversations. Phones were out, videos were rolling. Melissa wasn't just exposed. She was ruined. I walked out of the gala as if I had just wrapped up a business meeting, calm and composed, while behind me, Melissa's world burned to the ground. The moment the doors closed behind me, I took a deep breath. The cool night air hit my face, washing away the suffocating weight of the last few years. I'd spent so long being ridiculed, belittled, made to feel like I was the problem. But tonight, the truth had finally been louder than her lies. I pulled out my phone and checked the live feed of the news site that was covering the event. The headline was already spreading like wildfire. Scandal unfolds at charity gala. Anonymous donor exposed an affair with founder. I smirked. Perfect. I just unlocked my car when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. Jake, Melissa's voice. I turned slowly. She was a wreck. The woman who had spent years perfecting her image, always poised, always in control, was now a shaking mess. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes wide with panic, her hands clenched into fists. "What did you do?" she hissed, her voice raw, desperate. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." I leaned against my car, arms crossed. I told the truth. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "You didn't have to do it like that. You." She shook her head, eyes glistening. "You ruined me." I raised a brow. "You ruined yourself, Melissa. I just made sure you didn't get away with it." She took a step closer, her voice turning pleading. "Jake, we can fix this." I tilted my head. "Fix this?" She nodded quickly, reaching out to touch my arm, but I stepped back. The rejection hit her like a slap. "Don't you see?" she whispered. "This doesn't have to end like this. We can tell people it was all a misunderstanding, that the emails were fake, that I cut her off." "Stop." She blinked. I let out a slow exhale, watching her carefully. Even now, she wasn't sorry. Not for what she had done, not for the years she spent tearing me down. She was only sorry that she had lost. "There's nothing to fix," I said firmly. "This was over the moment you chose him." Her lip trembled, but she clenched her jaw. "I didn't choose him." I scoffed. "You didn't have to. The moment you decided that I wasn't enough, you made your choice." She swallowed hard. "I was going to tell you." I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "No, you weren't." Silence stretched between us. For the first time, Melissa looked small, vulnerable, powerless. She tried one last time. "Jake, I love you." I stared at her, my expression unreadable. Then, I said the words that sealed everything. "No, Melissa, you love what I gave you. The stability, the home, the loyalty. You never loved me." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel a thing. No pity, no sadness, just relief. I stepped into my car, started the engine, and rolled down the window. "You should go home," I said, my voice cool. "Oh, wait, it's not your home anymore." Her breath hitched. I put the car in drive, leaving her standing there in the cold. Melissa didn't go down without a fight. I knew she wouldn't. The moment I left her standing in that parking lot, humiliated and powerless, I could already see the wheels turning in her head. She wasn't the type to accept consequences. She was the type to rewrite the narrative. And that's exactly what she tried to do. 2 days after the gala, my lawyer called. "You're not going to like this," he said. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temple. "Let me guess, Melissa's playing the victim." He sighed. "She's claiming emotional distress, reputational damage, and attempting to frame the public humiliation as intentional malice on your part. In short, she's gearing up for a messy divorce." I chuckled darkly. Of course she is. Melissa had spent our entire marriage painting herself as the perfect wife, the admired philanthropist. The second I shattered that image, she had nothing left. And when a person like her has nothing, they do what they do best, manipulate. I exhaled. "What's our move?" "We hold our ground," my lawyer said. "You have undeniable proof of her infidelity, and public opinion is already in your favor." That video from the gala went viral. I smirked. "I know. She can spin the story all she wants," he continued, "but the facts are on your side. And the prenup? That's our golden ticket. I had almost forgotten about the prenup. Melissa had fought against signing one before we got married, but back then, she was a rising socialite with no money of her own. My family had insisted. And now, it was her downfall. The prenup stated that in the event of infidelity, the guilty party got nothing. Not a cent. Melissa could cry, scream, and threaten all she wanted, but legally, she was walking away with nothing. File the paperwork, I said. Let's get this over with. 2 weeks later, we sat across from each other in a cold, sterile conference room. Melissa looked different, tired, worn down. The glamorous, confident woman I had once loved was gone. In her place sat someone scrambling to survive. She had tried to play the role of the wronged wife in the media, hoping to gain sympathy. But the public wasn't buying it. The emails, the photos, the recorded affair, it was all too damning. And now, she was losing. Her lawyer, a sharp-suited man who looked just as exhausted as she did, cleared his throat. My client is willing to negotiate. She believes that, despite the circumstances, she should be entitled to a fair settlement. I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. There's nothing to negotiate. Melissa shot me a glare. Jake, be reasonable. I smirked. Reasonable? You mean like how you were reasonable when you cheated on me for months? She flushed. This doesn't have to be ugly. I chuckled. Melissa, it's already ugly. You made it that way the moment you stepped into that hotel room with him. Her lawyer sighed. Surely there's something we can do to resolve this amicably. I turned to my lawyer. Explain it to them. He didn't hesitate. The prenup is airtight. Melissa violated the fidelity clause. That means she is legally entitled to nothing. No money, no assets, no alimony. Just whatever personal belongings she had before the marriage. Melissa stiffened. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Surely you can be a little more flexible. No, I interrupted. I can't. Melissa's nails dug into the table. You can't just leave me with nothing. I tilted my head. Why not? That's exactly what you left me with. Years of my life wasted on someone who never respected me. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. Jake, I shook my head. Save it. My lawyer slid the final paperwork across the table. Sign, or take your chances in court. Melissa hesitated. She wasn't used to losing. She wasn't used to me being the one in control. But she knew she had no choice. With shaking hands, she picked up the pen and signed her name. It was over. Melissa had spent years making me feel small. And now, she was walking out of this marriage with exactly what she deserved. Nothing. The ink had barely dried on the divorce papers when Melissa walked out of my life for good. No dramatic goodbye, no last-ditch attempt to manipulate me into changing my mind. Just a cold, silent acceptance of her loss. It should have felt like victory, and in many ways it did. But it also felt like freedom. For the first time in years, I woke up without that familiar weight pressing down on my chest. No more feeling like I had to prove myself. No more walking on eggshells, waiting for the next sarcastic remark or public humiliation. No more Melissa. I had spent so long surviving that I had forgotten what it felt like to actually live. That changed fast. I moved into a new apartment across town. Nothing fancy, just mine. A clean slate. A place where every inch of space belonged to me, where I wasn't constantly reminded of a life I had wasted on someone who never truly valued me. At first, the silence was overwhelming. I had gotten used to Melissa's voice filling every corner of my life, whether it was barking orders, gossiping on the phone, or making passive-aggressive comments about how I wasn't ambitious enough. Now, all I had was the hum of the fridge, the distant sounds of traffic outside my window, and my own thoughts. And I liked it that way. I started focusing on things I had neglected for years. My career, for one. I had taken a step back from my business when Melissa convinced me that my time was better spent supporting her career, taking care of things at home, so she could thrive. It was a slow realization, but a powerful one. I had sacrificed my own ambitions for someone who never appreciated it. Not anymore. Within a few months, I threw myself back into work. Old clients were more than happy to have me back. New opportunities surfaced. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had purpose again. But my biggest focus? Reclaiming my happiness. One evening, I was at a coffee shop downtown, working through emails, when a familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. Jake! I looked up and saw Claire, one of Melissa's former friends, though she had never been particularly close with her. I smiled. Hey, Claire. She slid into the seat across from me, tilting her head. Wow, you look different. I raised an eyebrow. Different how? She studied me for a moment before grinning. Lighter. Happier. I chuckled. That's because I am. She smirked, stirring her coffee. So I assume you've heard about Melissa? I leaned back, sipping my drink. Depends. What's the latest? Claire shook her head. She's a mess. Nobody wants to be associated with her after the gala disaster, and her charity lost half its donors. And she hesitated, as if debating whether to say more. I motioned for her to continue. And Claire sighed, and the politician dumped her. Apparently, he didn't like the negative press. She went from thinking she was going to be a senator's wife to being completely alone. I let the words settle in. Melissa had everything: wealth, status, power. She had risked it all because she thought she could have even more. And now, she had nothing. I should have felt satisfied, maybe even smug, but all I felt was indifference. Melissa wasn't my problem anymore. I had moved on. Claire smiled. I gotta say, I'm happy for you. You deserved better. I nodded. Yeah, I did. And for the first time in my life, I actually believed it. That night, I sat on my apartment balcony, staring at the city skyline. The lights flickered, the streets below alive with movement. And I thought about everything. The humiliation, the betrayal, the anger. All of it had led me here. And I was grateful, because now, I wasn't just surviving. Months passed, and life only got better. My career was thriving again, my mind was clearer, and for the first time in years, I actually felt at peace. No more pressure to live up to someone else's impossible expectations. No more biting my tongue to avoid conflict. No more walking on eggshells in my own home. Melissa, on the other hand, was falling apart. It started with whispers, people distancing themselves from her, invitations that never arrived. Her charity, once her greatest achievement, was in free fall. Donations had dried up after the scandal, and the board had been forced to vote her out. Then, the politician officially cut ties. I had expected him to dump her immediately, but for a while, he tried to salvage his own reputation. Eventually, he realized there was no saving face. His campaign had taken a hit, and Melissa was too much baggage. He ended things quietly, and she was left with nothing but the wreckage of her choices. And then came the financial collapse. Melissa had always lived like money was endless. She spent freely, never budgeting, always assuming there would be more. But with no donors, no charity salary, and no rich politician boyfriend to cover her lifestyle, she had to face a harsh reality. She had nothing. One evening, I got a text from Claire. Melissa just put her house on the market. She's broke. I stared at the message for a long moment, then let out a slow exhale. I should have felt triumphant. I should have celebrated. But all I felt was closure. Melissa had spent years making me feel like I wasn't enough. She had treated me like a placeholder, someone to mock, someone to walk over. And now, she was the one alone, watching everything she had built crumble around her. Karma had done the work for me. A week later, I was at a coffee shop when a familiar voice made me pause. Jake? I turned, and there she was. Melissa. She looked different. Not the polished, confident socialite she once was. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail. Her makeup was minimal, and there were faint bags under her eyes. She wasn't the same woman who had strutted through life with unshakable arrogance. She looked lost. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she gave me a small, tired smile. Mind if I sit? I considered saying no, but something in me was curious. So I nodded. She sat down across from me, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. I heard her doing well. I took a sip of my drink. I am. She nodded slowly, staring down at the table. I lost everything, you know. I didn't respond. She sighed, shaking her head. The charity's gone. The house is gone. The people I thought were my friends? They disappeared the moment I wasn't useful anymore. I waited, letting her spill whatever she needed to. She swallowed hard. I've been thinking a lot about us. About everything. Her voice wavered slightly. I was awful to you. I know that now. For the first time, she actually sounded sincere. But it didn't matter anymore. I met her gaze, my expression calm. Yeah, you were. She blinked, as if surprised that I wasn't going to comfort her. I leaned back in my chair. Melissa, what you did, how you treated me, it broke me for a long time. But I rebuilt. And now, I don't need an apology. I don't need anything from you. Her lower lip trembled, but she nodded. I understand. I finished my drink and stood. I really do hope you figure things out. And with that, I walked away. I didn't look back. Melissa had once controlled my life. Now, she was just another chapter one had closed. And I had never felt lighter. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed it very much. Don't forget to give a like and tell us in the comments what you would do in such a situation.